Welcome, thanks for tuning in. My name is Andrew Hart, I'm Director at SPD Automotive, and I'd like to welcome you to this special CES edition of our case series, looking at the future of connectivity, autonomy, shared mobility and electrification through the lens of all the announcements that have been made at CES already and that we expect to be made over the next few days. On the line with me, I've got Mo Albador, who's our Senior Specialist around shared mobility. And we also have Jeff Hanna, who heads up our North America team. Welcome to you both.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
So I'd like to kick off just by getting your general feelings for what it's been like at CES. This time last year, we'd probably racked up 20 or 30,000 steps. We would have been sat in countless cars, probably had a few beers along the way. What's it been like for you guys being on a very, very different type of show?
It's definitely been a bit of a different CES overall this year. So as many of our listeners know, we're completely virtual due to the pandemic. And in terms of overall participation, you have about a fourth of the sponsors and exhibitors than you would have at a typical CES. Now, in terms of automotive technology and case, you've got a limited number of OEMs and a broad set of tier one and other suppliers presenting. In terms of the platform overall and some of those key differences, essentially most companies are choosing to make video presentations to demonstrate their latest technologies, followed up with a virtual booth where you can download materials, press releases, and the same. And I think in some ways it's been informative from an information standpoint, and you have seen a number of car companies like Mercedes-Benz, General Motors, and BMW still very committed to CES, but what you miss as an analyst is really what's happening between the lines. So there's important conversations, even looking at a traditional booth space and seeing where the buzz is. That's really lost this year. So as an analyst and research team, we've got to be much more organized to proactively discover what's happening sort of on our own. What we're seeing is a lot of one-on-one events, so attending those and really making a much deeper effort to say what is really new. So we saw a lot of companies, unfortunately, just rehash some of the things they had last year in to try and make announcements. So we've done a good job of really pulling out what's different, what's new versus what's just been carried forward from 2020.
Yeah, it's been tough, hasn't it? I think when we sat down to plan how we were going to research this event at the end of last year, there was a lot of puzzle faces, and we have had to look at different kind of data sets. We started to do Twitter analytics, to look at YouTube to see which videos have got the most views. But you're always trying to kind of replace the vibe that you would get from being there with something else, and it's hard to find that something else. Mo, what do you think has worked well, and what do you think hasn't worked so well so far?
I think Jeff described it really well on the exhibition side of things, but I'd like to touch on the conference side as well. Where we're used to kind of live presentations and live panels on the conference side of CES, this year it's all mostly pre-recorded sessions that I think they were mostly recorded in December, so they kind of failed to touch on some of the issues that have emerged since mid-December, and it has not been a quiet beginning to the year this year as well. Saying that the fact that presentations are pre-recorded meant that the presenters had more opportunities to produce the presentations to a higher level, so we're able to see some previews of products while the presenter is speaking and talking about specific features while showing them. So it was kind of an interesting juxtaposition when compared to an in-person presentation.
Yeah. I'd like to start by picking on kind of the most high-profile company, not just in automotive, but across all of the companies that have been at CES, and that's GM. So they had the keynote there. Mary Barra was talking along with a number of her people. We looked at the list of attendees, and over 2,000 GM employees were registered to attend. So a huge proportion of GM employees engaging with the event. Jeff, as a former GM employee, you spent a lot of time working there. What was your feeling of seeing GM up there? What did you see from their keynote that kind of really struck a chord? What did you think was quite different to what they presented last year?
Thanks, Andrew. I think overall, GM did a really solid job of presenting really a disparate set of initiatives, but how they were all stitched together in their transformation to become an electric vehicle company. So you might recall that the week before the CES show, General Motors changed their logo for the first time in about 50, 60 years to really signify that they're all in on EVs. And so if you looked at really the keynote and the messaging that, logged about 48 minutes overall, it was really foundational in all the different things they're doing. So I'll highlight a couple that jumped out of particular significance. First, a commitment to batteries and new electrical architectures. So they talked not only about things like the Hummer EV, but also really a platform to become scalable. So if you look at car companies like Tesla and others that started as electric vehicle providers, they really started with a heritage of having electrical and battery powered platforms that could scale to many different model types. So GM demonstrated their Ultium EV platform that will go from really high to low overall, and they've also put into place a chief electrical vehicle officer in charge of what they're calling a unifying CX platform for EV services. So as many of our listeners know, with the transition to EVs, and GM talked about this, things like range anxiety, the experience falling down. So they really highlight a number of initiatives from, reservation platform to getting your home upgraded even before your EV is purchased and you arrive, and really thinking about EV as sort of a different and end-to-end ownership experience overall. At the same time, in thinking about how EVs could be used more broadly, they had a number of announcements to enhance their telematics platform, OnStar, and a number of new services and ways, and really made a splash in terms of the delivery market. So a lot of our clients at SPD Automotive are thinking about not only do you provide transportation to people, but how you extend the value proposition to goods and services. So the Cruise team talked about their success in California and Arizona, and GM, under tight wraps, announced BrightDrop, which is a brand new initiative to become a leading goods provider, and they will be producing electric vans for the commercial space and have signed their first customer, FedEx Express. So overall, I think a really solid job for GM, especially unifying those different themes around this umbrella and their transformation to being an EV provider.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. I was really impressed with a fairly wide cross-section of different areas that they were focusing on, but their ability to not just show kind of flashy long-term views around flying taxis, but also to bring in improvements to their existing platforms like OnStar, and how they're going to bring in OnStar into the EV journey. And they seem to be kind of knitting together a lot quite effectively.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree, Andy.
Mo, we saw quite a lot too from Mercedes with their new Hyper display, and alongside that, announcements from BMW with iDrive. We saw Cadillac with a new IVI platform. What was your feeling on the infotainment side as to how much of this is evolution versus revolution?
Yeah, absolutely, and this was definitely evolution rather than revolution. But what happened really is the kind of the flashy displays. BMW, Mercedes with a 56-inch display that kind of dwarfs anything else that has been seriously shown in the market. BMW with kind of a flashy curved display that's that we haven't seen in a production vehicle before. What that really does is it overshadows all the evolution that's happening behind the scenes, whether it's on the software or user experience, or even from the hardware perspective. So we're getting solutions that work better, solutions that integrate better, and solutions that are more connected and more focused on the digital lifestyle. And in parallel to that as well, we saw the Samsungs and LGs of the world, and they showed their vision for how displays can take over inside the car as well. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of what we're seeing in the infotainment and display side of things.
Yeah, it's a real shame, particularly when it comes to things like infotainment, that we can't be there to try it out and play around with the different features, because I think it's only that way that you really get to experience what's truly new. I think looking at a 58-inch display is one thing, but understanding how they've implemented AI, how they're kind of more proactively engaging with customers, what kind of animations they have within there, even what kind of graphics they have. Cadillac's announced their partnership with Unreal Engine to build up a much richer type of UI than what's often available through more traditional automotive tools, and all of that kind of gets lost a little bit through marketing videos on CES this year compared to being able to try it out. So it'll be really interesting when our UX engineers get deeper into the system to understand how much of what they've implemented is really new in terms of an experience.
Absolutely, and from the service perspective, it's kind of the next evolution of connected services, where they include digital lifestyle applications and services, whether it's actual integration with smart homes and smart cities, as well as things like user profiles. And we heard a lot about data transportability and how users can maintain their profiles between different cars when buying and selling their vehicles. So it's definitely interesting times in the infotainment space, and it goes beyond the display size. That's kind of the big headline.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, on the supplier side, you were over at the Harman virtual booth earlier this week. What did you see there? They had a few new kind of concepts around audio, I believe.
Absolutely. So what Harman did at the show is really build upon the insights from their experiences per mile research. So one of the things that Harman really focused on is that the car would be a third place. And I think a lot of that is, one, driven by the pandemic, but secondly, the realization that consumers not only use their car to drive, but enjoy sitting in their car, maybe between appointments, use as a second office, use as a place to be entertained, a place to get away. So what Harman showed is, through their platform provided by different Harman enablers, really three use cases. One, to do sort of live concerts, and where Harman really succeeded with that vision is bringing together multiple enablers for a more immersive concert experience. So what I mean by that is 5G bandwidth into the car to bring in a high bandwidth audio, different visual cues on a large screen, a headrest with almost earphones that came out for a leading audio experience, and changes to interior lighting overall. So if you look at that, it really brings a concert experience to you in the car. Now, today you have to do that in a safe way. It's meant to be done as a stationary experience, but one could imagine as cars get more autonomy and cars give the ability for consumers to have time back, that kind of use case will be more and more relevant. They also picked up on two more, this idea that consumers will want to share content that they're creating coming out of the car. So one that I liked about what they called Creative Studio was the idea that you could use a driver monitoring system that's traditionally used for things like ADAS or safety services to basically, on an opt-in basis, record what you're doing in the car, what's that experience look like, and then share that out to your social network and out of the car. So one of the things we found at our own research at SPD Automotive is just that when consumers are in the car, they often feel isolated from their digital world. And Harman picked up on the idea that consumers, drivers, passengers really want to be creators overall and share that mobility experience with others. And then thirdly, a live gaming platform. So again, as all gaming goes to multiplayer, always connected, leveraging 5G in the car, leveraging the ear rest, leveraging a controller, and then making the content really device and platform agnostic. So Harman's got something called the Harman Ignite App Store to bring in that kind of content and make that available overall. So while those look far out in the future, Harman did state that all these are production ready in the sense that an automotive OEM could pick any of those up, customize them for their own needs, and launch them into the market.
Mo, in terms of shared mobility, that's an area that you cover a lot within your research. You work a lot with car companies and mobility providers, benchmarking different services and helping them with their strategies. Have you seen much at this CES around the future of shared mobility?
So interestingly, we haven't really seen much in terms of services and service evolutions. Obviously, services have had to reinvent themselves in some way or another in the past year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But we haven't heard much really in terms of what their future plans or roadmaps are. What we have seen, though, are two things. One is a lot of personal mobility devices. So we saw autonomous scooters and small pods that people can ride for short distances for micromobility applications. And then the other thing we saw is a set of enabling technologies that would have applications within the shared mobility space. For example, things like transparent displays where instructions and information can be overlaid over visors or windshields or any really transparent surface in the vehicle. And that would have a lot of applications for autonomous shared mobility in particular.
Good stuff. Is there anything else that either of you have seen that's stood out?
We also saw a number of innovations on the mapping front. So we spent some time with Hart Technologies, looked at their set of announcements, and they are really moving to a platform-based company and making many of their traditional navigation location tools available to end users to really build and enhance their own maps, which is quite a unique value proposition. So traditionally, the third-party mapping companies felt like they had to own the end-to-end mapping experience, and Hart Technologies really put that in the hands of their end users. So they announced a new service called Mapping as a Service, where individuals could take a lot of the assets and underlying location technologies from here, combine that with their own assets, their own sensor data, their own on-premises information, create internal maps that are good for the end customer to use in sort of a proprietary fashion. So here signed Deutsche Bahn Rail Project as sort of the first customer for that, but that's an interesting one to see overall. Here Technologies also added enhancements around EV routing, 3D city models, and also enhancements to how they're treating data overall, which is very exciting.
Excellent. Mo, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, kind of outside of the product side of things, there was some interesting conversations on an area that's very important to the automotive industry right now, which is the collection, utilization, and monetization of user data and how that happens and what has changed in the past year or so, and the effects of legislation on that. So it was some very interesting conversations on topics like what to expect from a federal privacy legislation on the US front. Generally, the mood seems to be optimistic that we are closer to getting to something of a federal policy regarding data privacy. And the industry is really looking forward to collaborating with the government in order to have meaningful legislation that is applicable for real-world applications. And there were questions about transparency and informed consent, and how what the big tech companies like Amazon, Google, and Twitter are doing to balance privacy and feature implementation, and make sure that they reduce the friction at the front end with the end consumer. And the past year has brought up a lot of challenges where usually non-tech savvy users are leveraging a lot of technology in their day-to-day. So a lot of these companies have had to find ways to explain in a simpler way what their products are, how they work, and what data they collect, and how they use that data. So there's definitely lessons there to be learned for the automotive industry that we're hoping to see trickle down as such.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mo and Jeff. It's been good to get your early thoughts on what's hot at CES this year. There's still quite a few announcements probably to come, and a lot to digest. We usually are just as busy in the weeks after CES as we are during the week of CES, writing up the report and making sure that we capture as many of these insights as possible to help our clients understand what CES means. So we're looking forward to publishing that report in the coming weeks. In the meantime, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn at SPD Automotive, and we look forward to hopefully talking to you all again. Bye.